So one of the challenges of soloing in bebop is when you have a lot of chord changes, which bebop songs typically do, to really play convincingly in the idiom, you would like to be able to strongly imply what chords are going by when they're happening to such a degree that even if there were no other people accompanying you, the song might still be recognizable. So I'm not a piano player and this is not bebop, but I'll try to just give you an example of playing melodic lines that imply certain chords of a famous song and see if you can recognize what it is. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that was not a very great rendition of Billy Strayhorn's classic Take the A Train. What I tried to do was really suggest the chords by mostly playing the notes from the chords. So this first chord. So that's a little melody play with only those notes. But that can give a really jumpy feel. So you might not want to be jumping around like that. And in fact, in bebop, it's more idiomatic to play what's called a descending stepwise line. And that just means that we're generally picking a note and then we're going to descend by either playing the next adjacent note or maybe skipping one and but not going any farther than that. So we're typically playing a note right next to the one we just played. And that gives a really fluid feel to the playing. So if you want to play a more fluid line, and you don't want to skip around as much and you want to give the sense of some chord, what you can do is just try to play one of the notes from the chord. So this one has 4 on the 1, on the downbeat. So these go in groups of beats. This particular song has 4 beats in a measure. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 6, 2, 3, 4, 7, 2, 3, 4, 8, 2, 3, 4. So there's 8 groupings of 4 in the main chord phrase there. So every time I get to 4 and I go back to 1, I'd like to be on a chord tone if possible. So there's 4 to choose from, and it doesn't really matter. You could pick this one. Or this one. It doesn't make any difference. One of the things that you'll see shortly, though, is when we change chords, you might not end up on a chord tone on the 1. So if I start here and I play this chord, then this chord, we'll hear 1, here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So I started on a chord tone on a 1. On my next one, this note is not one of the 4 in the chord. So now we've lost that feeling of being on a chord tone on a 1. But that's okay because we're going to be able to do something else that will really ground this to the chord here by just getting back on track as soon as possible. So we want to get to the next chord tone on a 2, on the next strong beat. So if I just go immediately to here, I'll be there too early because there's strong beats and weak beats. So you have the beats with numbers assigned to them are the strong beats, And then the beats where I'm not counting, or where I would say and, would be weak beats. So 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1. So if I go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and, I don't want to be there on and, I want to get there on 2. So I need to do something else to just stall for half a beat for my and then I can play this on 2 and 3 and 4 and then I'll be back on track. There's lots of different things to do, but one of the neat things that you can do in bebop is jump to a note that's just one note or one key immediately underneath the one you want to land on. So we're here, 1, I want to be here on 2, because that's a chord tone. So I'll go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So the whole thing sounds like this with the chords. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3, 4. Even if I don't play the chords anymore, it can still transmit some of the feel. And then maybe you'll feel that it kind of wants to go here after my. Of course, if you're paying attention here, you'll see that when I hit my 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to have the same problem here. I'm not going to be on one of these 3 notes when I get here. So I could do the same thing. Or I could do another stalling tactic, but let's do this one note underneath. You could call this approach note or lower chromatic neighbor note if you wanted to be fancy. But if we use that and the idea that we would like to be on a chord tone on the 1 or the 2, if we can't get there on the 1, I can play some notes that will imply that progression. So this idea of approaching from a half step underneath the chord tone is such a cool sound that there's no reason why we have to limit that to stepwise descending motion. So we can actually approach any of the chord tones at any time using the same technique. So instead of playing A train, you know, only chord tones, we can make it sound a little hipper. Just by putting these extra notes a half step or one piano key away from where we really want. So bringing this back to Horace Silver, that fifth feel is sort of his signature move, but in the beginning of this, we're a half step under, and when that resolves up to the right note, this fifth here, instead of doing something else with it, it just immediately cycles back to the first note. So listen for this fifth sound. It's all over the album. And then in the beginning of Safari, see if you can hear where this note moves up its half step. It's very quick. But once you clue into that sound, there'll be other spots on the album where you could hear the more standard way of doing it, which is this. Playing it more in the context of melody instead of a chord. So that was interesting because I never heard this album before. It was the first thing that jumped out at me. I didn't know what to expect as far as bebop in this piano trio context. But right from the drop, it felt totally grounded in bebop, but in a way that was really original and not at all like the playing of Charlie Parker or Dizzy Gillespie, some things that I've heard a lot more of. So I hope this helps you kind of lock into a cool thing to listen for on Safari and throughout the Horace Silver Trio album.